Okay, welcome back to Thrive in the Future. This week we have Andrew Funk from the Royal Path podcast with us. Welcome, Andrew.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Sure. So one of the things we thought would be a good icebreaker question is how do you come up with the icebreaker questions on the podcast? They always stand out and you get a lot of engagement on them.
Um, I will go through probably about 20 of them throughout the week. Just randomly, they'll just pop into my head and be like, is that a good one? No, that's not a good one. And as the audience has gotten bigger, I try to do more inclusive questions. At first, I would sometimes ask Father and Cyprian about comic books, which we both at various times in our life have been into. So we can usually get a little bit of dialogue there about what's your favorite Batman villain or what's your favorite costume. But as we've gotten bigger, I've understood that more and more people are probably not going to be into that as much. So lately, some pointed out in a recent comment that I talk a lot about food. I think food is a good one. So I usually just try and find some like little nugget that I think would be like, I don't drink anymore, but like if I were drinking with some buddies, what would be a good conversation? Like what was something that could even spark up some lively debate? So usually that's what I try to do.
Yeah,
And they're not always good. They're not always good. Sometimes they are dead on arrival. And I really have to push it. And we end up talking about something different. So
yeah, you don't give them a heads up usually beforehand, right?
I tried to, and it came across as inorganic when I did. I actually like before recording one time, I told Cyprian and Father, okay, this is the question. And I think it really threw off the chemistry. So I don't do it anymore. So usually I just
Yeah.
try and have it off the cuff and organic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I like the food ones when you ask them a question and they start riffing on some Southern California restaurant and then they get all nostalgic and stuff. It's funny.
Sometimes I do that because I'm just like, guys, this is gonna be what's gonna be. It's fine, you know. Uh I've never been to California. I don't plan on going. And so usually if that stuff kind of comes up, it's cool because I usually have some other stuff to think about anyway. So I'm like planning my next Costco run or something like that while they're talking about stuff. So I just kind of kick back and like, who would win in a fight, Doctor Doom or the Silver Surfer? That's usually when like I start to kind of fade out. That's usually what comes to mind. So yeah.
That's neat. Yeah, so you get a lot of folks during the week that comment on your walk up to you and comment on it and everything like that, right?
People from my parish, people who know me personally, I think if something sticks out to them, they'll come up and talk to me a little bit about it. But generally speaking, kind of not really. I have a couple buddies that will message me their answers. I had a friend who kind of, sent me like a 3-part text on his interaction with gas station food this last
Gas
week.
station
And
food.
yeah, he kind of talked about the places he liked going growing up and who has the best donuts and the best pizza and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And but generally speaking, to be real, I usually get pretty uncomfortable when people talk to me about the podcast because I don't really know what to say. And there's this dynamic that's come up. I am by no means uh like famous. Not at all. That's not, but enough people listen when they come and talk to me about something they've expressed to me. They're like, I feel so close to you. I feel like I know you so well. And it's very weird that it's like a one-way thing because I don't really know them at all. I want to get to know them. I have no problem getting to know them. But a lot of times, my main emotion when someone comes up and tries to talk to me about it, other than like that opening question where we riff about whatever Southern California food or whatever fast food we like, other than that, I tend to get pretty uncomfortable because I don't really know what to say because they'll sometimes praise is involved and I'm just like, well, thank you, that's very nice of you, it's very kind of you and stuff. And then usually I was kind of like, well, glad you like it, I'm glad, I'm glad it's helping. It's mainly just a platform for father to talk. So I don't get too big ahead about anything. I think I just happen to be a good everyday Joe to like be able to kind of bring some of father stuff, who he's already very good at bringing it from here down to here. He's excellent at that. But sometimes he needs it from here down to here. And then
Right.
that's where I come in. So, yeah.
So everybody check out the Royal Path podcast on YouTube. It's really great. We like listening to it as well. So let's dive into the episode for this week. What we were thinking about talking about is life in the ordinary. We're right in the middle of the dog days of summer. It's like, are you for real or are you going through the motions at this point? Every day is like a reflection of the day before, and to use a obscure 80s Kansas lyric, but yeah. And and it's just like the weatherman doesn't have any trouble predicting the weather because it's hot every day, and it's just I lose track of what day it is in July because they're all the same. So, but one of the things that Perp and I were talking about is just embracing that life in the ordinary. So we wanted to invite you on and first give a little bit of background, a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. So I've been Orthodox coming up on this March, it'll be 10 years. So like 9.5 years, something like that. And I'm from Missouri, and I lived in Iowa for a little while, but I came back to Missouri as quickly as I could. And I'm married, got a mess of kids. And so I don't really have any kind of like formal theological training or anything like that, which is I think one of the reasons why it works so well between father and I, is because a lot of times we've missed recording sessions for whatever reason, and I realize how much I benefit from just having to sit and listen to him talk, my spiritual father talk for 2 hours,
Right.
and having to like process it and keep up with it, because I have to ask questions. I have to stay engaged. I can't zone out. I can't really get on my phone, so having to just sit there with that is actually enormously beneficial for me. But, in Missouri being hot, like Missouri is hot, and like, it's I like it now. But again, another one of those things is kind of being brought back to life, is having to like realize that, through the church and through Christ, and being baptized into the Orthodox Church and taking part in the sacraments, is that it's an introduction. It's life at its fullest. It doesn't offer really any distraction for you, other than like the promise of a reward. Like, is if you can do this, if you can stick to it, the day in and the day out, it'll be beneficial. It's not the day in and the day out for the sake of the day in and the day out. It's very much like you are establishing a pattern for eternity. Like the things that you're doing to your soul and are having done to your soul and letting God do to your soul is establishing a pattern that will continue for eternity. So so no pressure, so but yeah, it's difficult. It's very difficult. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't remember what episode it was. You were talking about the mundane and embracing that hot weather this summer, right? And really getting in touch with that. And that's kind of what started mine and Scott's conversation. But as I thought about that for the next few weeks, it was like, yeah, in liturgy, there are points where it starts to feel humdrum, and then all of a sudden it just like opens up, and all of those humdrum or mundane, ordinary things are where you actually touch life, like sitting watching Dora the Explorer episode for the 10th time with the kid, and then it's like, well, I'm not watching that, and I'm not watching, and then I'm watching the kid watch and learn, right? And it's like this moment is completely useless in a lot of ways, but it's actually also the most rich and connecting.
I think that is what one of the great lies of the world is again, just a little bit more like a peek at Andrew, is that I work in recovery. I work with people who are recovering from drug and alcohol abuse. And one of the things that I have to tell them is that you are returning back to mundanity. You're returning back to the day in and the day out, the thing you've avoided for so long. That's the ground you have to go back to. And the reason why it's going to be more difficult for you is because you've played in the realm of emotions that nobody was meant to play in. You ingested substances like I did that took you to highs and lows no human being was really meant for. It's very difficult to come back to that mundanity and to have to actually trudge through the day in and the day out and like you were saying, like find the like not only like I guess like the beauty, but like the benefit and the holiness and like the day-to-day actions of living life. That's ultimately like the desired goal, is because if you read the lives of the saints, yeah, they're praying and floating off the ground and stuff like that, but you know, they're reciting the Psalter by heart. They're meeting with people and healing them and reading their minds and stuff like that, and reading the people's minds and answering questions that people never asked, but they wanted to ask, you know, like that kind of crazy stuff. But that's after years of mundanity. That's after years of doing the work, being obedient, reading scripture. You know, nothing happened for a really long time. Most of the time, I would say most of the time. And when I find myself, and I often do find myself in this place of it's becoming repetitive, and I'm going through this right now where it's, you know, it was a particularly long weekend with church. We just happen to make more services than we normally do. And it's like when it starts to become mundane, when I start getting irritated, when I'm like, okay, let's be done. Father, give the blessing. Father, give the blessing. Let's get out of here. Let's be done. Later on, when the kids have gone to bed, I really, well, this is an opportunity for me to kind of go deeper, for me to go like to the next level down. And oftentimes I really resent being called to the next level down because it means things are going to be harder and I have to embrace mundanity even more, which is something I find difficult. So yeah, I'll end with, I know I'm going on, but I'll end with like what made sense for me with summer, this conversation that you guys are referencing here. What made sense for me with summer was just having to embrace the nasty things about it, the things I've never liked, the getting bug bites, being surrounded by mosquitoes when you're out in the woods, the sweat, the bad smells coming off your kids because they've just been playing, they're red-faced and sweaty and they just stink to high heaven. And you know, the having to like navigate like what days are too hot for let the kids go play outside, having to drink water, and just like leaning into all of it is where I found like eventually like got back to like for the first time in my entire life, I'm like, oh wow, I really like summer. This is life. Like this is it. This is the all of nature's giving at its best right now. This is like the climax of life because everything is just bursting full of life. And I had been a really big fan of winter up until that point. So having this switch and just leaning into that stuff, you know, it's a spiritual lesson, having to lean into the uncomfort, trusting that God wants me to be feeling the way that I'm feeling about this stuff, the tiredness in my legs, the bug bites. And then bug bites are a really, really good analogy for demons. If you scratch it, it will get worse. If you leave it alone for literally 3 minutes, it'll go away. Just don't pay attention to it. It's uncomfortable. It just something fierce for no joke, like 45 seconds, and then it'll go away.
Yeah, it's learning not to look for the things to complain about.
Oh, yes.
Because when you're complaining about the sweat and the smell, it's like worse and worse and worse. And when you just go, this is the way it's going to be, and I'm going to look for something to like about it, it
Yeah.
starts getting better. But it's hard to do. I hate doing it. And
Right. I think
It's
it's
such
also
a,
being present, right? So it's instead of, I spent a lot of time saying, oh, I wish it was fall. Oh, I wish, I can't wait till September. I can't wait till October. And one of the lessons that I've been dealing with this summer is that be present, right? Instead of wishing your life away, right? So,
mm,
and and always looking to tomorrow instead of embracing today, right?
yeah. I think it's Metropolitan Anthony Bloom on his book, Beginning to Pray, which in light of my repentance, I haven't read in a while, but I think I still like that book. Like, I think I still do. But there's a part where he talks about, and I think it's this book. I hope I'm not misquoting, but a person who's like through like his will trying to get something to move faster, like a service or like an annoying like graduation ceremony or like whatever like obligation you're having to sit through that's really testing your patience, by getting yourself all worked up and wishing it was over and getting all angry is like a person running to the front of a bus
Mm.
and then back and then running back up to the front again, hoping that will get them to like their destination faster. Like
While
it's
that's going
like
down the street, you mean?
while it's going down the
Yeah.
street. Yeah. So it's like you still have 3 more blocks to go before your stop, but you're running to the front of the bus, hoping that will get you there sooner. And it doesn't really make sense. And it just gets us all agitated. So yeah, it's hard because so much of our life can be dictated, especially as Americans, especially in the year 2023, can be dictated to our whims. And it's
Yes.
the insanity lies in expecting that to be everything and getting extremely frustrated when it's not that way. And one of the things that Father said for me that was one of those Christ-like moments of the right key went in the right lock and it turned and a bunch of stuff came off at once. A whole bunch of stuff was interlinked. Was a common trait among all people he's worked with who have quote unquote like poor mental health is this tendency to externalize all of their problems. If this would just be different, if this person would just be different, if this thing would just be different, this problem that's making me insane, rather than looking in and looking to change your inner self to be okay with that thing that's happening. You know what I mean? You see what I'm
Right.
saying?
Mm-hmm.
So it's yeah, but it's challenging. It's very challenging. So
It's hard to give up the selfishness in a culture of selfish.
that
It's selfish and pride.
it encourages you. I've always wondered what totalitarianism we were going to land at, and it seems like right now it's leaning a bit more towards Brave New World, rather than 1984. It's still a toss-up. We could still land on either one, but it looks like it's a bit more like Brave New World right now. So, yeah, it's interesting, and I'm not sure I would really recommend everybody go check it out necessarily, because there's a message behind it that I'm not 100% about anymore. But there's this really interesting video called "This Is Water" by an author, David Foster Wallace, who did commit suicide in 2008. So take it for what it is. But he was this really poignant author. And in this video, it's a college commencement speech. And if you do check it out, if your listeners do check it out, go for the 22-minute long one. It's worth it. But basically, he talks about the day in and the day out. And you graduates have no idea what day in and day out really means. You guys have no idea what it's like to be doing the same thing over and over and over again for years and years and years and years. And one of the things he talks about is just imagine that you have to wake up and go to work. And then on your way home from work, all you want to do is go home and eat food and go to bed because you have to do it all again the next day. But then you remember you have no groceries, so you have to stop at the grocery store, and you get the one cart that pulls maddening, like to the left. You have to go all over the store, and there's only one clerk working, despite it being the end of the day and this being like one of the busiest times of grocery stores, blah, blah, blah. And he talks about there's a lady at the front who's arguing with the cashier about a coupon that's expired, right? And he talks about how horribly frustrating and unjust this is and how it's not fair that you have to be stuck in this situation. He's like, but what I like about these moments is this chance to get out of what he calls, what does he call it? The default setting. He calls it the default setting of just a million of little assumptions throughout the day that the world revolves around you and your needs. And we're just accepting this all the time without even realizing it. The simple fact of the matter is, what he says is perhaps you can entertain the notion that these people waiting in line with you have much more difficult lives than you do. And they're not just things in your way. They're not just props in some movie. Actually, in fact, maybe the lady at the front who's arguing with the coupon lady is so grumpy and just yelled at her kid because she's been up for the last 3 nights with her husband who's dying of cancer. Like, and maybe the car that cuts you off in traffic, the big stupid SUV or whatever, maybe the reason they have an SUV is because they got in a car accident 5 years ago and they have to drive this giant SUV to feel safe. It doesn't really matter if this stuff is true or not. What matters is you're now controlling the thoughts that are going into your head. You're now starting to pay more attention to what's going on. And it's like actually brings this life and this like work and discipline to the everyday mundanity. And it's like, it's a really interesting video. And he kind of goes into stuff about you need a God. And this is where he kind of gets shaky because he talks about just pick a God. It doesn't matter what God it is, but it has to be bigger than you. It's like, okay, that's not 100% or even close to 100%. But he brings up a point that, you know, people who worship their beauty, there is no such thing as not worshiping. At all times, you are worshiping something. If it's your beauty, you will never feel pretty enough. If it's your intellect, you will never feel smart enough. If it's your bravado, you will never like feel charismatic enough. And at the end of the day, you need something bigger than you. It's a pretty interesting video. And I think a Orthodox Christian who has the proper context, you know, could really contextualize a lot of that stuff in a way that would kind of be applicable to, you know, to making sure that you don't go insane throughout the day.
Yeah, definitely. That's great, especially dealing with other people. And then perhaps that person that you're dealing with is you're entertaining angels unaware or something, right? Like it says. And did you give that person even a smile? Right. And not to mention the folks that have need or whatever else as in addition to that. So
yeah, absolutely. That's a whole other layer you can add to that whole conversation in your head is you don't know which one of these people might really be like a big part of your salvation.
Right. Yeah, one of the things I saw as I started going more towards the liturgical tradition was the Roman Catholics in their liturgical calendar have the period in between Pentecost and Christmas time is called ordinary time. You know, we have other feasts and fasts and stuff in there, but they call it ordinary time. And I thought that was interesting. Oh, so this is just like ordinary time. So this middle of the summertime is ordinary time. And I didn't become Catholic, but you know.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I've not heard that before. I know next to nothing about Catholicism though. So
yeah, it was in like one of those. I think it also overlaps somewhat with, you know, some of the the Book of Common Prayer and all that, right?
okay.
So I think they had that in there as well, because like the Anglicans and stuff are, you know, came from Catholicism. So
Sure.
I just thought that was interesting that this whole period in here is ordinary time. Now, Orthodox
for a long
have
time.
all kinds of fasts and feasts in there, and it never really downshifts or whatever.
It does not. It does not. We're always prepping for the next thing, which is good. We
Right.
need that. God knows what he's doing. The church in her wisdom knows what she's doing. And
Mhm.
we need that. I need to be able to be working towards something. Some season is getting ready to come up. And as I
Sure.
get more and more into the faith, the more and more I know what those seasons feel like. And it's like, okay, so next is Dormition. It's going to be hard on my wife because the Dormition tends to be very difficult on women. It's been my experience.
Mhm.
I don't know if there's a church teaching behind that. I have no idea. But I know during the Dormition fast, it seems like women tend to get attacked a little bit more.
Hmm.
So,
That's interesting.
yeah. Again,
Yeah,
I have no idea.
and just the downshift of Vespers. I really like Vespers with the candles and everything, because it's just such a downshift. And so I go over to Topeka with Father Nikolai, and it's like the front is much more dark wood,
Hmm?
and so it really gets that you feel just like a security blanket, right? In
Mm,
Vespers time, when the lights are down and the candles are on. So
beautiful.
it's like,
Absolutely fantastic.
yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, again, the church in her wisdom knows. I'm
Mhm.
sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's fine. I was thinking about the last trip to the monastery. I read The Little Prince, read the pop-up book version, but I was reading that it was talking about the fox comes to him and says, "You need to tame me so that the uh, wheat, the color of the wheat, will have meaning for me because it's the color of your hair." And the Little Prince says, "Well, how do I tame you?" And he says, "You have to follow rites." And you have to show up every day at a certain time. And then I start anticipating it earlier and earlier, and I come. And that we tend to rush over the rights, right? We don't introduce each other anymore. We don't ask about people's family, their history,
Sure.
and all that. And we skip all that, and we're not doing that. But with matins and liturgy and vespers, it's like attending those as much as possible. It's like you're entering into those rites and you are being tamed and balanced. And the same with the feasts and the fast, right? Back and forth, in and out, and then these times in between, right? And it's a moderating force that
Yeah.
makes sitting in the ordinary easier,
Ah,
or just sitting without talking. Because I mean, the number of people that can't sit with someone sharing, right, and just listen is, it's not happening. And
it's something that's quickly falling out of style.
Mhm.
yeah, but, yeah, and we call them rights and services and things. It's very interesting corollary there.
Yeah. One of the very first things that demons will do is they will antagonize you. And I can't think of a state that more people live in all the time than just being, or sorry, agitate. Antagonize,
Mm.
agitate's a little bit different. One of the very first things they want to do is agitate you. That's like that's them starting to creep in, like that's like the fingers starting to come through the door to kind of start to open it up. Is the agitation, is it like knock, is like, tapping on your shoulder, scratching your ear, kind of getting you kind of like, what does that person mean by that? What did he say there? Why did he say that like that? What did he mean? Was he referencing that thing that you were talking about earlier and he's using it against you now? And so like, I can't think of a state more of people, just normal non-Orthodox people I talk to, they are just so agitated. And it says in the
Yeah.
Psalms, the peace of the sinner, like I'm not seeing many sinners with peace right now. It just seems like most people are agitated. And I'll watch like videos on YouTube of just funny stuff, or whatever. And I'll catch little glimpses through. It's like, and I don't even mean to be that guy because I'm not even that old, but like nobody knows how to have a conversation anymore. There is no give and take. Everyone's just kind of waiting for their turn to talk. And it just turns into this whole, like, especially with the younger you go, they kind of, their eyes glaze over until it's their turn to talk again. And then they come back and they don't really talk about the things you just talked about. They
Mhm.
kind of just like want to talk about the thing that they're interested in. So there is no give, there is no take. There's nothing. That's just, everyone wants to talk about the thing that they want to talk about all the time. And it is what it is, but it keeps people in a state of self-centered agitation all the time. And the minute people wake up on the phone and they don't have, any kind of structure, any kind of like orthodox, structure, any kind of relationship with God, the very first thing they do is they get on their phone, and they generally stay on their phone most of the day. And to go back to something that you said not too long ago, I believe it was Scott, I think, that there's a correlation I have between the amounts that people complain is there's like this, like, I don't know what kind of graph it is, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's this correlation to how much you are complaining is equal to how much you have the right to complain, quote unquote, like the right to complain. And more often than not, the more a person is complaining about how tired they are, about how stressed out they are, how unhappy they are, the less they have to complain about. Like, generally speaking, they have a good house, a good job, they have a lot of things to be grateful for. I'm not sure I'm saying this clearly. What I'm trying to say is, the more a person complains, as I talk to them more and more, I'm like, your problem is you don't have enough problems.
Mm.
Like, you need some real meat and potato problems.
Right.
Like, you need some, like maybe a pretty major illness or something. Like, you need something to kind of really hit you down, because as it stands now, I'm not really interested in like your postmodern ennui, like, that you're feeling. It doesn't really do anything for me. And like, you can sit there and talk about how bad your parents messed you up or whatever, but at the end of the day, like, I'm still thinking of, like, the person I talked to who witnessed like their child getting murdered or something like that, and how they don't complain. They have like no time to.
Right.
They're constantly working. If they're handling it correctly, they're constantly working forward. They have to keep their guards up at all time, because they know how dark it can get. So, yeah.
And to complain actually hurts them. I mean, because they have to go through it and relive it, right? And so they don't.
Yeah. And the jarring nature of complaining, the jarring, like, the I don't know, I quickly like lose words because I start getting into how I feel, but it's like, it's just so spiky. It just is so spiky when you complain inside. It feels like you like swallowed a cactus or something. It just like, it hurts. It's weird. It doesn't sit right when you sit and complain against circumstances, when you grumble. It's just, it's hard. I do it still. Don't get me wrong. Like, I still like, really, like, okay, sure, okay, so yeah, glory to God for all things, I understand, let's move forward, bear the cross, let's move forward. But it's just only because I've complained so much, and I just know what it's like on the other side of it. And it's rough. It's really, really rough. So, and it's a dead end. It doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, it's like Father says several times on the podcast, is that a lot of depression actually comes from pride. It's like, why is this happening to me? This shouldn't happen to me, and everything else. Not to discount, the other stuff, but a lot of it. And I mean, I have the same problem. It's like, come on, why does this happen to me?
Yeah.
It shouldn't happen to me. And then it's like, okay, so you think you're better than that? What,
Sure. Yeah, and I mean,
stuff.
it's that mundanity. I mean, to bring it back to that, I mean, like, it's like, I mean, sure, you can use the argument like, I didn't sign up for this. Okay, sure, whatever. I didn't sign up for this life. Okay, sure. But also, like, people can't handle this. And maybe I talked about this before, I'm not sure. But people can't handle, like, they're like, oh, what did Christ do? In the time where I mentions like him like there's all these years missing out of the Bible, and it's like, what did Christ do? He's like, maybe he went to India and all this different kind of stuff. It's like, no, it says what he did. You just don't like the answer. He worked and grew and became a good man and took care of his mother. That's what he did the day in and the day out. He worked. He was a carpenter. He did not make a ton of money. He just was obedient to his mother. He went about his work and he did the mundane things of life. He made food. He cleaned up the house. He took care of people around him. He got his work done. He rose early. He was 30, right, when his ministry began. Yep. So he's beginning to feel the aches of old age in his late 20s. Like he probably had to do a stretching routine and stuff like that. Like I have to do. He probably had some beginnings of some pretty severe joint pain, especially I imagine he had a really good work ethic. So he probably was really pushing his physical self. Like, I mean, he ate bad food sometimes. I don't know. Maybe he did. He got sick from it. Like, I don't know. It's just, these are the things that he endured, but people don't like that answer because it's reflective of like what we're called to do, which is just hang out in the waiting room for the 60, 70 years that you're here. Just hang out. It's like, it's really next to nothing in the long scheme of things. And, you know, I know, it was her feast day yesterday. I can never remember. Saint Euphemia. Yeah. She said, if I knew if I knew 1/1,000,000th of what was waiting for me, I would have suffered 1 million or something like that, like 10,000 more. The sufferings I endured, I would have endured 10,000 times worse. If I knew 1/1,000,000th of what I was to receive, I would have done much more. And you know, Elder Ephraim of Arizona writes this chapter on sickness and suffering, and he said, when you get to heaven, you will have wished you suffered more when you see how God is able to glorify it. And mundanity is its own, I guess, off the top of my head, I'm sure there's a teaching about this or maybe not, but mundanity is its own form of asceticism, that constant denial of needing to be like entertained and stimulated.
Sure. Yeah, and it even says on the Orthodox, one of the prayers on the Orthodox prayer book is help Orthodox to struggle. And it's like not to get through struggle, not to avoid struggle, not to, you know, just to struggle. And it's like, wait a minute.
It's so
that blew my mind.
It's so unromantic. It is, you know, like, and again, coming into Orthodoxy, I had just come off of a time where I was really into psychedelics, like magic mushrooms and acid and stuff. And that stuff is so entertaining. It gives you such like it's like a really, really well done action movie where it gives you, it's like, it's stimulating you in all these ways, and there's these really powerful emotions and experiences and feelings that you're feeling from these things, and you're so spiritual and you're feeling it. But the problem is like, one, maintaining those feelings and those like quote unquote truths that you received while under the influence of magic mushrooms, which, you know, 90% of that stuff I've had to really throw out, you know, in my time in asceticism and Orthodoxy. It's very hard to maintain that state. And if you don't maintain the state of having just, you know, gone through a trip or whatever, then you kind of just revert back to this like kind of ego driven dude that ends up like kind of being like insufferable to be around. And Orthodoxy ends up like in this place of like, no, there is no action movie. This is, again, just the day-to-day existence. This is just the mundanity. This is just you waking up for the millionth time, whatever, you know, not actually literally the millionth time. You know, after this, I'll kind of try and calm down a little bit, but it's that time of night where things are a little thing for me. So there's a part, I don't know if you guys have seen it, in Star Wars, The Force Awakens, where the main character is waiting, and you don't know what she's waiting for. You just get introduced to her. You see her do a job, and she turns in the food, or turns in the work that she did, and she gets food and goes back to her house. You see her making food, doing all the stuff, and she eats. And then at a certain point, she makes like a little tally mark on a wall. And on that wall, you can see just tons and tons of tally marks. She's been there for like a long time. And that's an image that's always been really comforting to me. It's just like, okay, just one more day. Like, I'm waiting, this is the waiting room. And luckily this is the waiting room in like the working room too. So yeah.
Wow, that's great.
I think
Waiting
so.
is hard. Waiting is really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess that's also conversations, right? Not waiting, not paying attention, being present in the conversation. And that, I don't know, I need to get better at both.
Yeah,
We all do.
you were saying
Yeah.
that you have conversations with people and they're not really listening. They're trying to think of what they're going to say next, right? And I was talking with a friend of mine who plays like guitar out at bars and stuff like that, and or at open mic nights or things like that. And he says you're playing and nobody's clapping or anything. They're glued to their phone. And it's like, yeah, I mean, you're just background music to them, dude.
Yeah. Yeah. And that also gets into it's, again, Father would be really good at yanking what I'm trying to say out and presenting it in a really good light.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry, you guys don't have Father here, you have me. So you're going to get a jilted kind of unweird, kind of like weird, kind of nonsensical thing. But I think one of the ways that conversation used to work was that there was this need to be uncomfortable and not to be able to resort back to like your own world. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of had no choice. You were stuck on this train or this ferry with this person, or you were stuck in this office or this school or whatever with this person. It's hot. There's no air conditioning. This is the way things used to be, 100 years ago or whatever. It's hot. There is no air conditioning. You're probably in an uncomfortable kind of suit thing. Which I deeply admire. I'm really into this whole thing right now of like seeing people wear like nice suits in really hot weather and they're just sweating, but it doesn't matter. Like they're good. Like I'm just like, that is on point. Like I really like that. And there's no like escape to retreat back to your little comfortable world, right? Now we have that. Anytime, it's amazing to me. I get my feelings hurt, how like almost instinctively, if I'm having a conversation, my feelings get hurt. It's almost like instinctive. It's like muscle memory that I reach for my phone to get back to my little world, my little like news feed, my little like Tumblr, my music, my YouTube algorithm, and find something that'll make me feel better. And with that comes this like, I don't need to care about your thing anymore. I have my thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone's good at guitar and that makes someone uncomfortable because they're like not good at guitar, then you just find something in your little world to lord over them. You know what I mean? So it's like the type of person that's like, yeah, I've been really practicing guitar a lot, kind of getting into the groove a little bit. It's like, yeah, well, yeah, I'm learning French. I got Duolingo, like, downloaded on my phone. I'm learning French. It's like this, like weird. People are not able to like acquiesce things to each other anymore. So if someone is good at something that kind of like makes them uncomfortable in this weird way, they just retreat back to this thing, and the phone just like enables that behavior. So Father would know exactly what I'm talking about, and he'd be able to be like, yeah, but it's because of this. and to quote Saint Sophrony, and then there's this part from the Bible, and then he'd just kind of go on and on and on, and he'd be able to like, and for the next 20 minutes, he'd kind of unpack that. But really, at the end of the day, you got me, and that's how I see it. It's just like we now have this thing between us at all times,
Mm-hmm.
and it's ego, and it's the device that feeds the ego, which is the phone, and it's the lack of caring about other people genuinely in a Christ-like manner, and not just saying I care so I get the Instagram likes or whatever.
Sure.
Genuinely caring. And it's so difficult. But that's the thing about gold, is it's precious. So when you find a person who's able to be like that, be present and be good and be cool, it's like a breath of fresh air. It's like, oh, this guy, okay, awesome. Or girl, because I found him in both. So
That's great.
yeah.
Closing thoughts.
Do I have any closing thoughts?
What about you, Perpend?
I don't know. I was listening to you talk about conversations, and that was one thing I've been thinking about is when I was younger, people would ask questions that they knew the answer to. Like, so how do you start the fire in your fireplace, right? I was like, this is so stupid, because you know the answer because you've just watched them make a fire, right? And they have that conversation. Or when the farmers were sitting at the cafe, right, drinking coffee, discussing how much rain they got at their place and comparing, well, at this road, they got 10 more inches over here than that in the last month. And you're like, this conversation is so stupid. It's uninteresting. But I find myself looking for those conversations because that is where it really is. Because when you have the patience to sit there and listen to somebody talk about Monday, we got a 1/4 inch of rain and no rain on Tuesday, but I saw that it rained for you 20 miles away, right? And that when you sit through that, it makes sitting through the other conversations important, but it also is that constant icebreaker question that eventually rolls into the deep thing, right? Because it didn't rain Wednesday, so I took the kids down to the creek and we did this thing, right? And then you end up in this story. But without the weather conversation, you're never pulled in. And we need to learn to do that.
It's a thing of beauty, and when I was younger, it would make me want to claw my eyes out. Then I'm like, how
Yes.
are you talking about this?
Right.
But as I've gotten older, I've realized each little thing has to dial back my life. And now my house and my yard are my life. That's what I've been given to take care of. I'm not going to be given much more than that. So that's what I talk about. And it's beautiful. I just find myself just realizing more and more. I said to my wife the other day, because my dad was very much like what you were just talking about, Perpend, is like, oh yeah, I remember that creek, didn't that used to run a little bit more to the south? Yeah, now it's kind of going to the southeast a little bit. It's like any normal person would be like, what are you talking? Why does this matter? But it's like, no, it does matter, because it's in these subtle things that you find amazing things. The last thing I'll say, no, it's not gonna be the last, but you guys know the story about George Washington Carver?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So he's like, God, reveal to me the secrets of the universe. God said, you can't handle it. It's like, God, please reveal to me the secrets of America. You can't handle it. Okay. How about God reveal the secrets of me? You can't handle that. God reveal to me the secrets of agriculture. You can't handle that. Okay, God, what can I handle? How about this peanut? And look at all the things he got from the peanut. He just found this little minuscule thing about life and hyper focused on it. And God, look what he did with it. If we all just found that little, not in a selfish way, in just a really godly way, just found that little thing and just focused on it. Instead of thinking we need to overthrow the capitalist government and establish a communist paradise or something, whatever people are thinking is trendy and cool now. So yeah.
And it's it's in little things where we actually see ourselves most, right? You talked about him asking to see himself or understand himself, right? And that's a mess that I don't want to do, but I do want to do, but I don't want to do,
I
and I
know.
fight with it. But then you're like reading Winnie the Pooh because you've read Abbott Dorotheus for 3 days straight. And you're like, I just need something small, right?
Yeah.
And so you're reading Winnie the Pooh and you're like, oh, wow, Eeyore has some complexes here. So does Piglet. Oh my.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do that. I shouldn't do that. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. That ties into what Abbott Dorotheus was saying. When I was
I
at a
it's a
monastery, and they said, yeah, you have to read books like that. And you're like, wait a minute. Monks are telling me that I need to read books like Winnie the Pooh. This is just, but it is. You can't stay in that high level.
Yeah, you
yeah.
said that was actually a required book to read, that pop-up book
Little
with
Prince,
the
yeah.
story of the fox, right? The Little
Everyone's
Prince.
going to be a monk there, or yeah, that's a required reading.
Yeah.
Man,
And
that's really cool.
how many people that are there go, oh, this is, why am I doing this? You know, it's about like, go chop some wood.
Yeah.
Those are the
Yeah.
people that you hear later on that said, yeah, I went to the monastery. I didn't last 2 weeks.
Everyone's expecting something grand and something big. And I've never been to a monastery. I
Mhm.
like not for any length of time, so I can't speak. But most people that come into the faith are looking, including me, are looking for something that's going to make life less boring.
Right.
And it does, and it doesn't. It just gives meaning to it being boring. It's not being boring for boring's sake anymore. It's boring because like you won't be bored in the next life.
Mhm.
So just know what being bored is like, and be grateful that this is not for forever, and that eventually things will get different. And then when things get different and actually things can get hairy, you'll miss the boring stuff. Like, if a crisis emerges and suddenly you're looking for the boring again. You spend so much time of your life complaining, then something big happens, car crash, part of your house gets lit on fire, maybe your wife gets sick or something, like suddenly you're like, oh, I want to get back to that boring life again. God's like, not so bad now, huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah. Thank you.
thank you.